Things aren't looking good for Greg Gutfeld in the sense that the media landscape around him is shifting quickly, and the space he has long occupied, political satire with a sharp, contrarian edge, has become harder to navigate without drawing intensified scrutiny. Much of what he faces now is less about any single crisis and more about a convergence of pressures, evolving audience expectations, changing network priorities, and the broader fatigue that often accompanies long-running political commentary. When a personality becomes strongly associated with a particular style or ideological lane, the room to maneuver narrows, and even small missteps can feel magnified. Gutfeld has built his brand on sarcasm and a deliberate willingness to say what others avoid. That approach worked well in an era when viewers were hungry for pundits who sounded more like barroom conversationalists than polished anchors. But over time, the border between edgy humor and audience polarization has tightened. What once felt refreshing can begin to feel repetitive, and the audiences who initially rallied behind the format sometimes drift toward newer voices, ones who experiment with different comedic rhythms or recalibrate the balance between humor and commentary. A host who thrives on provocation must constantly innovate to avoid becoming defined by predictability. Television itself also presents challenges, as late-night and political comedy splinter across streaming platforms, podcasts, and social-driven content. Traditional network formats must compete with creators who operate without time constraints, content restrictions, or the pressure of nightly ratings. For a personality like Gutfeld, whose appeal relies heavily on the interplay of panel energy, audience reaction, and recurring on-air chemistry, this fragmentation makes it harder to command attention in the same way he once did. Viewers now toggle between dozens of comedic voices, which dilutes the cultural impact even of successful shows. There's also the difficulty of staying both humorous and topical. When political commentary grows increasingly intense, audiences often expect consistency in viewpoint, but comedy demands unpredictability. The tension between those two expectations can create moments where a joke lands poorly or a segment is interpreted as tone-deaf. Public figures who rely on satire are consistently judged, not only for accuracy but for tone, timing, and sensitivity to shifting national moods. Someone like Gutfeld can find himself criticized from multiple sides, not sharp enough for some, too abrasive for others, and too partisan for those who crave broader comedic range. Meanwhile, internal and external pressures accumulate. Networks are constantly reevaluating programming to maintain ratings, balance advertiser considerations, and keep pace with competitive formats. Even successful hosts must contend with audience churn, changes in leadership, and evolving strategic priorities. When any of these factors shift, speculation grows, whether warranted or not, about the stability of a show or the trajectory of a host. Public discourse tends to magnify these narratives, especially when applied to figures who already spark debate. Personality-driven political comedy also carries the burden of longevity. Maintaining momentum year after year requires more than commentary. It demands reinvention. If the comedic voice doesn't evolve in parallel with viewers' sensibilities, the gap becomes noticeable. For Gutfeld, whose persona has remained fairly consistent, the challenge is identifying how to refresh the formula without abandoning what made it successful. That tension can create the impression that his current environment is less favorable than before, even if his core audience remains loyal. Ultimately, saying things aren't looking good for Greg Gutfeld isn't a prediction of collapse so much as an acknowledgement that he operates in a volatile media world where the margin for error is thinner than it once was. He is navigating a period in which expectations are high, criticism is amplified, and the comedic landscape is shifting under the feet of every late-night and political satire figure. Whether he adapts smoothly or struggles with that transition remains to be seen. But the pressures shaping his current moment are unmistakably more complex than those he faced earlier in his career.